I'm going to share my screen with you. All right. So some quick background before we're going to talk about technology in the church. And for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now, actually maybe even longer, I've been teaching a media for ministry development course for Central Seminary. And so I've tried to avoid creating way too much material for today. So today is kind of handpicked material that I think will be beneficial to us. And so I'm looking forward to our engagement with this, but also what other questions you might have. So we're going to jump into some things about online worship, some things about social media for ministry, some generative AI conversations, and then more. And so if you've got some questions that aren't related to any of those main 3 topics, if you might hold on to those till the end. But obviously, if you've got questions about the material that we are talking about, please feel free to ask away. All right, so online worship. I think that we all hope what's happening when we worship with people online is they're at home, they're engaged, they're worshiping with us. But I imagine what often happens is a lot of life chaos. And, if there's kids involved, they're running around and you're trying to track them down and they're hungry and they want to play or whatever it is. And it can be, difficult and distracting. And one thing I think we should be aware of is the fact that our online communities who worship with us are in a lot of different kinds of scenarios. If you've got families, they have one challenge. If you have shut-ins, they might have different kinds of challenges. And so people who are on vacation, people are at home. And so I think we should be aware for our own communities of who is watching online and what might be some unique challenges they face, and how do you kind of think about creating a better environment for them at home. And so I want to talk about 2 main things about online worship. One of those is how are we designing our online worship digitally, and then one about kind of the goals of it. And so the first is, I think a lot of churches settle for their online worship design that it's just a spectator worship kind of design, where basically you're kind of like a security camera footage. You're just kind of peeking in on what's happening in the room. And so people can just log in and just peek into what's happening in the room. But there's no real engagement with that online audience. There's no tailoring of it. They're just flies on the wall. And that is certainly better for some people than nothing, because, especially if you're shut in, if you're on vacation, you feel like you can be a little bit more connected. But the experience obviously would not be very engaging because you're just kind of peeking in. And sometimes that is, camera placement and camera quality of, we've got a bad camera far away and this is not interesting or engaging. The person speaking is tiny on the screen. But other things are just, there's no thought to the process in which we've invited those online guests into the service. We slapped a camera in the back of the room and we wanted to be done with it. And so spectator worship design obviously is not going to get you as much impact as some other models. Another version of online worship design would be like acknowledged worship, where the online people who are worshiping with you are at least acknowledged in the service time. And maybe that's lower third, like overlays on your video that specifically are tailored text towards them. Maybe that's people during the welcome who specifically welcome people who are worshiping at home, or during announcements or other elements of the service where you say, hey, we know you're there, kind of, and kind of talk to people who aren't in the room as well as those who are in the room. And that level of at least engagement makes you feel a little bit more invited into the service than if you're just a spectator and no one ever mentions that you exist. And then a third model might be, how do you tailor your worship where that you've created some design elements where the online service specifically incorporates that online community. I think minimally, when you think about having people who are like media hosts who are in the chat of, if you're streaming on Facebook or on YouTube, people who are asking people if they have prayer requests, saying, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm here to worship online with you. Let us know that you're here. People who are interacting in the chat. You might have special segments of the service, either before the service or after, that they get their own announcement reel or their own video introductions or other kinds of elements that are tailored specifically to that online community. But how do we let the people that are worshiping with us online know we know that they're there and that their experience is a little bit different, and talk directly to them and let them know how they can connect and interact with us? And so those are three just kind of generic broad models of thinking about some of the different ways we could design worship. And then we think about what the goals are of
Recording
those
in
designs.
progress.
Is if you're like, I'm glad we're just streaming, then you're saying, well, at least we're doing something, right? Like that's the bare bones model of, well, I wish they were here in person, but I guess this is better than nothing. And we'll just make this available. But you're not really hoping for much. You're kind of checking a box that, well, we're doing this thing. But perhaps some other goals that you could have are like, maybe your online services are an on-ramp to your church, that some people just don't feel safe walking into a new church for the first time based on their own experiences, whether that's not having ever been in a church, or maybe that's they've had bad experiences in churches, but maybe they just want to peek in and be able to worship online with you, but they, before they take a first step of walking into a building. And so if you're thinking about the online service as an on-ramp to your church, then you should also be thinking about, well, what's the guest experience of this online worship like? How am I making sure to not take for some things for granted, make sure to explain elements of the service, explain how they can get more connected. And so it can be very different when you assume your online worship audience is just people who are sick or on vacation, and you don't feel like you need to explain anything to them. But if you're thinking about your services as an on-ramp, how are you making it safe for guests and welcoming for guests to join you and worship online? And then the third kind of a goal that you could have is, well, what if it's just discipleship? What if you're actually hoping somebody actually changes through this process of worshiping online with you? And so I know sometimes we can feel a little skeptical about the outcomes, especially if you think about kids running around in the room or whatever might happen in a household while you're worshiping online. But we do have a New Testament filled with, long range discipleship from Paul writing letters to churches all over, of like, we have even a scripture that has advocated that there's something that can be transformative at a distance. And so how are we providing discipleship opportunities? Maybe part of this online worship and discipleship, besides asking people for prayer, besides asking them to engage with you on the chat or those kinds of things, like, what's the follow-up? And you might choose to have a follow-up where they can come in person, whether that's a kind of a unique group that's just designed for that online community, or bringing them into the regular kind of in-person community for something in person. Or you might create other online spaces of, hey, we're going to do an online prayer group. Join us at X time. Hope to see you and we can talk and get to meet. Or an online coffee. We're just like, hey, get your own drink. We're going to just chat. It's a free and welcoming environment that might feel safe for people to get together. But in what way are we trying to actually disciple people, and not just hope that, well, if I put a camera in the room, that will be all that's needed? I've got some other kinds of topics about online worship. One of which is music is difficult for streaming. I think when you're in person, your music is more forgiving. The human ear has a better dynamic range. And so if certain elements of the service are really quiet and some are really loud, your ear can handle that better than We've all had the experience of watching TV and then there's a commercial or an ad that pops up and suddenly the volume level changes and it's jarring. And so there's something about that digital sound that is not as natural or easy on the ear. And so I know it can be challenging for training volunteers to have the audio for your stream at a different mix than what's in person. Not just because of volume levels, but also your room has a certain characteristic and sound that will go missing oftentimes online. And so one of the things that you might consider doing if you haven't done is adding an audience microphone for atmospheric sound in your space. When you have just a microphone like this and you're streaming, you hear just the initial audio of your singers, but it really helps to hear a little bit of sound of your church singing along. It helps to hear the little bit of the reverb of the room. Obviously, you don't want tons and tons of reverb where it gets muddy, but adding a little bit of sound of your space can really make a big difference to the sound. And I actually have a book, which I could grab for you later, but Dave Adamson has a book on social media and church life. And he's talked about that there's a lot of churches who have kind of moved to just showing the sermon part of a worship service because they felt like they couldn't get the sound good enough to give a real experience. And so they were just tailoring their online worship just around sermons. I think that only can work in certain environments because I think a lot of people would feel like they're missing out to not be included into the rest of those services. But it is at least worth noting that you are not alone if you find it a little bit difficult getting your sound quality good enough for what you would hope for. And that's one of the challenges with online worship. The other thing is, how do we think about taking, like, if you're already recording services and streaming services, how do you take moments from those things and repurpose them? Make a little video clip of a 2 to 3 minute part of your sermon and repurpose that for social media on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whichever platform you prefer. But chances are people scrolling on any social media platform are not going to pause with you and watch 30 or 45 minutes of a sermon. But what if you had some engaging short clips that got people hooked where they wanted to watch more of those clips and maybe then like, oh, I really like the sermon, I want to hear the rest of it. And then they might follow through and listen to more. But I think when we drop just here's a 30-minute sermon, it does not catch as many new people on social media platforms. Let me pull up, I'm seeing some chats here. So I see Bill talking about how they really love Zoom and because Zoom does engage with folks. Yeah, Zoom's really helpful for engagement. It's really challenging for newcomers. And so that's the kind of hit and miss around Zoom is you can definitely have a more engaging, interactive experience at times, but a lot of new people are really scared about jumping into a Zoom around other people that they don't know. And so you might think about, how do I create more security or more safety for a guest to jump into a worship Zoom?
One of the things we do have is an online host.
Okay.
There's a person who is online with them, and if somebody else comes in, they greet them and that kind of thing, and that kind of helps a little bit. But I think it's a good solution for our smaller churches like ours.
Yeah. And you might think about messaging that says something like, hey, if you're new and Zoom feels intimidating to you, know that you have no pressure to turn your camera on this, or some sort of thing that says, if you want to feel a little bit anonymous, a little bit safe, we want you to know that that's okay.
Yeah.
And that if they see more people interacting in a Zoom, they might then turn the camera on and want to start interacting. But there might be a little bit of a hindrance to jumping into it for the first time.
And we try not to call them out by name.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, Steve. Yes, online music's definitely difficult. Any specific software recommendations for novices making these small clips? So there's so many different video editors. I always use Adobe Premiere Pro because I'm kind of in Adobe's suite of products. What I like with Adobe Premiere Pro is you can click a transcribe button and it creates a whole caption set. You can tweak the edits of it, and then like you can tell it how many characters you want at a time. So you can like design it where you get the nice captions on the video clip, and you can edit, the look of the captions and all that kind of stuff. But I know that even like on mobile devices, there's is it CapCut, and there's a free DaVinci Resolve made by Blackmagic Design, which is a big video editing company. But DaVinci Resolve, if you've never gotten into video editing, especially if you're on PC, that's a good free one if you want to get into that. Apple, I know, has some built-in equipment that I won't say is free because you paid for it when you bought your computer, but there's some other solutions out there too. And Theo's comment here, reaching out to local large church tech teams. That's a very good suggestion. So there are teams who have already designed setting up their stream and their mix, and so they don't do as much like problem solving and planning. They're fine tweaking things, and tapping into them and asking, hey, is there any way you could have somebody come by and help us as we look over this thing, guide us in this process, or have some equipment that you're not using anymore? I think that's a great suggestion of reaching out to some local larger churches, tech teams for help. That could be really helpful. All right, I'm going to move forward here. And as was mentioned by Bill, having people who are specifically hosting is really helpful for negative reasons and positive ones. If you have spam or people saying problematic things, you want somebody there who's there to moderate and to take those things down, because it can be really distracting if someone is saying some ugly things on your stream. But two, creating a positive environment of a place where worship and prayer and that kind of atmosphere is good is also there. And so those media hosts are setting the tone for everybody that's on the stream. And I would note, if you get into really tailored services, some people have media hosts that are actually like on camera and live behind the scenes, those kinds of things. But that's probably more than most smaller communities are going to interact with. And then here's the hard one.
Recording in progress.
You should rewatch your streams at least every so often. I know it's challenging to watch yourself if you're on the screen, but you should know what your experience is like for other people who are jumping on. And so most of us have recordings, or many of us who are streaming online have recordings available where you can rewatch. And having a little sense of what it's like for other people is helpful, because it helps you think about, oh, next time I do this, I don't want to do that anymore. And you start improving. And I think tech is good in this space. We live in a world where video games are released and they're not actually done, because they keep planning on making more updates and more improvements. And so instead of thinking, well, the service, it's there, it's out there, it's finished, maybe we could look it over, figure out more ways to improve, and keep making it better for the next week. And I will say, in this quest to make it better, the goal is not super effective productions. The goal is to make your service quality enough that it's not distracting your guests away from what you're trying to accomplish. And so if you're worried about, I just want the most perfect audio ever, that will be a very painful process. But if you're thinking like, how do I get this audio where it resonates with people and it's not distracting, it's not painful to listen to, like how do you get it to a quality spot where people can just engage and they're not worried about other stuff going on? I think that's a production level that's a more healthy goal. Anything else about online worship before we jump into a different avenue?
Hey, this is Danny. Just one small thing. I learned about the show Friends that was on TV a number of years ago, that it took about 300 people each week to produce a 22-minute comedy show. And so we've got to give ourselves a little bit of grace. If we expect that our services are going to have that kind of polish, we're going to really be disappointed. I'm with you all the way, Dallas, that we don't want it to be in the way. We also have to be realistic. I love the definition of doing the best you can with what you've got. And then looking for ways. I like the idea of continuing improvement. We just have to recognize that we're not going to have all of the bells and whistles that larger churches or professional groups are going to have, and then we got to go from there.
Yeah. And when people ask, well, why can't this look like, insert large church that's online? Why doesn't this look like Elevation or something like that? You're like, well, we haven't spent $60,000 on cameras and, another $50,000 on the other, like, the mixers and cables. And, like, it gets very expensive, and a heavy amount of volunteers to do like these large church style productions, where you have to have someone who's navigating, saying which camera to go to next and switching camera scenes every, 5 to 7 seconds. And just all of that is beyond what most everyday churches are going to do. But I also think it's reasonable for guests to ask, like, I would like that the service didn't get muted, of like, I should hear what's happening. The video signal shouldn't cut out, or it shouldn't be so choppy that it's behind and it's out of sync and I can't watch. And so hopefully we are doing what we can to make sure that, it's a positive experience for our folks. But you're right that we are not making Netflix shows, or this is not an HBO series. We're doing the best with what we can.
And on the other hand, can I make a counterpoint to that?
Sure.
The internet is a great equalizer. It puts us in a space where we never could be before because of the lack of resources. Now almost anybody can do this, and that's why there's so many podcasts out there and that sort of thing. And I think that's a really helpful thing, even though, it might not be polished. Most people don't care. Most people just want to see a basic, really good show. If we've got good content, I think people appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I'm satisfied with that.
And I'm seeing in the chat, JT also is talking about enjoying getting other pastors and colleagues to critique each other's. And I always feel like this is always really helpful. And I think you should state up front what you're wanting critiques for. Like, where is the welcome space for feedback? Because sometimes there's parts of it that you're like, I can't do anything about this certain thing, or here's the space in which I want some feedback. Just that way everybody has a good experience of that critiquing conversation. But yeah, because it can be really hard to watch your own self, to see all of your own flaw, and you'll see some of things that you do as flaws that maybe other people don't even see as flaws, just your idiosyncrasies. And so getting other people can be really helpful. Theo?
I was just going to say, using groups like this and other Facebook groups are super helpful in troubleshooting. We've all been doing this for the most part, at least the last 3 years. And so most of us do not have a new problem, whether it's trying to figure out audio, whether it's trying to figure out how do I have, switch different camera angles, but I only have X, Y, and Z. Most of us don't have new problems. And so you can use groups like this group and groups like other Facebook groups like Church Media Techs, and you be a pastor and join that group and then ask them a question, and they're often willing to answer it and give you detailed kind of step-by-step instructions. This is what you need to buy. I'll put an Amazon link in the chat. Most folks are really, really helpful. There are always a couple of mean people who are like, you're stupid and you shouldn't be asking this question. But the vast majority of the people are really willing to help share their expertise.
Yeah, that's helpful. That I think you mentioned the church tech, or there's church sound and video. There's like if you have certain presentation software like ProPresenter, there's groups around those there. So whether you have like specific programs that you want to get into a Facebook group for, or just a more general church and media, those groups are really helpful. And with Facebook groups, you can search keywords of if someone has already asked a question that you would be asking, and that's always something that's really helpful. Of I know that there's always certain questions that keep coming back up, and you might actually not have to ask. You could just go find where people have already addressed those issues. But yeah, that's a really easy available resource for everybody. All right, I want to talk about social ministry. Nona Jones has a really good book about from social media to social ministry. She worked in a church environment and was hired by Facebook to be like the church liaison for Facebook groups. And so all of her work is around how to, one, help churches like adopt and use Facebook groups, but also give feedback to Facebook groups of how churches could use the platform and make tweaks for things. And so her book's really interesting because you get an insider from Facebook suggesting, how do we do this? But her book and some others that have been recently out really focus on social media should be social for our ministries. And so for many of us, we use our social media for broadcasting when they can be for interacting. And so I'll jump through this a little bit quicker because we want to make it through more stuff today. But usually we get on there and we post at people instead of talking with people. And social media is designed to be better about interaction and listening and talking. And so many of us are still in a model of like putting up a bulletin or a church billboard as what we're using our Facebook or Instagrams for. And so this quote from Bo Coffrin, our social media channels shouldn't be a billboard that people drive by. They should be a coffee shop that people hang out in. In what way are we just talking at our social media communities instead of talking with them? And so I feel like Facebook especially has become like the church bulletin announcement spot where you just get, this is happening at this time and this place. And that's not very engaging. And people don't like or interact with those kinds of comments. And so I just wanted to use an example of some things you could be doing instead of simply just throwing out like a bulletin style announcement about an event. What if you have something exciting coming up and you just post a photo and say more details to come, but we're really excited about something that's coming up or whatever it is, but like create some anticipation and excitement and actually withhold some information for a minute. Start revealing, you don't have to reveal the whole event that's happening. Start revealing elements of things that are happening. If you've got multiple speakers that are going to be there, don't announce all the speakers at one time, announce them over different posts so you get to celebrate different speakers and their works and their kind of flavor. Start showing some stuff about how you're working for this event to be happening and some behind the scenes photos or videos. Then there's the actual like the streaming or broadcasting of the event itself, but then it's not over. Start sharing clips or photos from that event and not necessarily dumping all of them at once, but maybe there's different elements of the thing that you want to highlight over time. And then start telling stories about, was that event useful? How did it help somebody? And so there's ways in which we could be building even more excitement instead of just, I know I need to announce something, throw out a general announcement. And all of this is still a little bit more on the broadcasting end of it because it's us telling people about things. What we really hope to do is, whether it's on Facebook, creating a Facebook group for your church community. If you've got younger people, you might create like a Discord channel that more often used for gaming and those kinds of things, but create a space in which your people can interact, can ask questions, can share joys, can send prayer requests in, so that there's more conversation happening throughout the week, not just it's not just like Sunday centric. So that was what I was saying there. I have a friend who has what he calls a nerd church. They do gaming together, a lot of younger adults and teens. And so they have a whole Discord server, and there's different channels in that where you can ask prayer requests. There's spots where you can just talk about stuff going on in life. There's things about certain games that are out, and then they stream into it and they broadcast like voice chat with one another and stuff during game nights and that kind of thing. Discord would probably work good for that age group, but probably not for some of the middle adults or senior adults. And so Facebook groups especially would work even better in that kind of demographic. But instead of just having pages that talk at people, and you can ask questions as a page, but the interaction level is just different in groups right now. And Facebook especially is really trying to push the groups. And so you should think about how to create, whether you want to create a group if you haven't already done so. Another important social ministry topic is think about how to answer actual questions people have. Dave Adamson's book, and at the end of today, I'll go grab the 2 books and I can help with the links if we don't have those. But Dave Adamson has a book about how he used to be the tech person for Andy Stanley's church in Georgia and near the Atlanta area. And they went through and started retitling all of the sermons, because the sermons were usually the catchy, like fun, churchy sermon titles. And instead they switched it to the kinds of questions people search online for. And we live in a world where people are not searching for churches as often as they're searching for answers. And so how do you think about what questions you're answering in your services and in your messages, and tailoring our titles of things towards the kinds of things people ask? And whether that's asking them on Google or asking them on YouTube. And it's a worthwhile process because it helps you think through, is my message actually addressing something people are wondering about or not, right? What is the question people are asking for this? And then a third major point for folks is your media and your online communications should hopefully talk like a real person. I feel like there used to be a space in which, as organizations, you should talk very corporately and very generically and blandly and safely. But when people hear those communications, they just don't sound engaging or interesting. And so how do we talk a little bit more warm and personal with people? And I think I've got, actually I have it later. I've got an example later of the difference in a kind of a corporate-y thing and a more warm conversation. But I sometimes notice this I have some people who have media training who are like have a journalism background. And so their online posts are very journalist-like and very corporate-like, but it doesn't excite anybody. And so you think about, like, how do you have a voice that is a little bit more engaging to the everyday person? Any questions about trying to do kind of social ministry before jumping into generative AI? All right, I will jump into the next thing. This is what's all over the internet right now, is generative AI. It's kind of computer technology that it can create content, whether that's text or image or audio or video. And so it is creating, it has taken a leap in the last 6 months to being more creative than it has ever been. And with the way that technology is exponentially growing on this front, it will likely continue to grow very quickly. And I wanted to start with just one, as like, this is not, does not take much, but if you're looking for a way to enhance some audio for like pre-recorded things, like if you're going to post a video on social media, or if you have sermon podcasts, Adobe has their own AI like audio enhancer that you can upload a file onto that site, and it within about 5 minutes or so, it will give you a AI enhanced version of that audio. If you've got a video, then you can relink that new audio to your video file and export it to have a better audio source. But all it's doing is it's taking the audio of your source and it's analyzing it, and it's best determining how to make it sound a little bit more like a podcast audio quality, that it just sounds better. And so it's just an easy free feature. Who knows, at some point it won't be free, but at least right now it's free. And if you know that you have some audio challenges when you're recording videos, that might be something you might check out. All right, so ChatGPT is the main player in the text kind of text language models that are out right now. There's versions of ChatGPT as other companies work with it, like Bing, that are trying to incorporate it in separate ways. ChatGPT has a bunch of new plugins where if you're in there, kind of, it's very cheap, but paid service, you can add in things to have more access to the internet and other kinds of things to build into your ChatGPT. But all ChatGPT is a search, well, not search, but a text computer program where you can ask it questions or say things to it, and it interacts with you very, very quickly. And so I find what's interesting is I want like what everybody decides to ask ChatGPT in the first day of using it is very interesting because people might want to ask like, what's the meaning of life, or all sorts of random kinds of things to just see what the computer would say about those things. Now, like people, ChatGPT will have biases, and we should be aware of those and be thinking about those as we interact with a model. This model is based on a whole lot of data sets. And I think OpenAI has been, they tend to try to explain what data sets they've used and things like that. But if it gets so large in scale that you won't actually know fully what has built the model. But some things that you should know that you shouldn't use ChatGPT for. It is not very good at math right now, which is a quirky, weird thing because a computer should be good at math. Calculators are good at math. But because it was built around language, it often uses words and talks about a math problem correctly, but it hasn't actually incorporated the process of doing the math. It's just talking about it like it understands. And it does some of that kind of things often with other science data. So there's some factual reliability issues in its current model, which will, I'm sure, be more perfected over time. But there are some things that it actually is really helpful for that might be useful to you. If you want a quick brainstorming session, you can type in a bunch of stuff about what you're working on, what you want to be accomplishing, what your goals are, and then tell it, hey, give me 20 questions about this topic, and it'll just spit out 20 questions related to it. Or give me 20 ideas about how to do this, and it'll just spit it all out, and it can do it really fast. Some of those things will be helpful, some won't be. But if you're just talking about like throw stuff at a page and see what's there and then try to work off of that, that's a really easy way to suddenly do a lot of brainstorming really fast. It is also really good at search data because it was designed around a lot of questions being asked and text and online writings. And so you might write to ChatGPT something like, I'm writing a sermon on the problem of evil. We're talking about the book of Job. People are wrestling with, where's God in the midst of pain? Start talking about what you're hoping to accomplish in the community. And then you say, well, what would someone be searching for online who would also be interested in the sermon? And it might spit out for you 5 or 10 or however many you ask it for questions that somebody might be asking for that would be related. And some of those might be helpful for you of thinking about, oh, I haven't really thought about answering that into the sermon, and it might actually be useful. Or for sermon titling of, oh, maybe there's a titling idea in this that I hadn't thought about. And so it's very good with that kind of language stuff around alternate titles and questions and that kind of stuff. I also find that I am not particularly excited by writing clickbaity things. What are the engaging, like here's a little 2 or 3 sentences of text to get someone interested in a video and a service and whatever it might be. And if you write to it, here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm talking about, here's all the stuff, write me a social media post that is engaging and invites people to take part in this. It can spit out 20 versions of that. And you can decide what you like or what you don't like from it. Any examples of an actual ChatGPT search that you did? Yes, I will. Remind me if I don't get to it, but I will come back to some examples in a minute. Well, let me pull something up. Let me see if I can do that for you now. I'm going to move this over here first. Oh, actually, I'll move it over here first. Let me think of a good prompt example for you.
Can I share one that I've used?
Sure.
Sometimes the well goes dry a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I found with ChatGPT, if I'm thinking about composing a prayer that would be specific to help people, I've asked it to construct a paragraph using evangelical language or Baptist language to talk about God's love, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting how the biases come out when you see that, but it does give me some seed thoughts and some wording that helps me frame my prayers in such a way that I think they're really helpful. But I
Yeah.
find it, I have to always edit it.
Oh yeah. And that's what I think, like, it's a good tool in the process of crafting, right? It's it's not always giving you the output that you're like, oh, just use this as is. But because it's got so much language skills, there might be a phrasing or something that you find really useful. I'll show this one as an example here. I'm writing a sermon on 1 Corinthians 15:35-49 in the hope that our resurrected bodies will be better than our current ones, like a seed planted that grows into a beautiful plant, or bodies that will blossom into what God has created us to be. Our bodies' weaknesses will be strengthened. Can you write me a teaser for social media about the sermon that is hopeful and exciting? This first one here. Are you longing for a future where your body is infused with divine perfection? You might adjust things on divine perfection. Join us this Sunday as we dive into 1 Corinthians 15 and discover the breathtaking hope that lies within the seeds of our existence. Prepare to be inspired as we uncover the profound parallels between a tiny seed's magnificent journey to a flourishing plant and the radiant resurrection of our bodies. It's just an example of different ways that you can I see it here, and I don't want to share it with you, but I thought of another use case that was actually interesting that's not as related to us necessarily, but my mom's been going through mesothelioma and been doing chemo and radiation and those kinds of things. And she got her scan report back from the doctors, but didn't have a doctor's appointment for a day or so after it. And so I was able to upload the text of the report and have it explain a bunch of, what does this terminology mean? What does this phrasing mean? Since it's built around language, it doesn't have any issue with medical jargon language. I wouldn't trust it to know, like, here's best outcomes or source, here's what's going to happen. But if you just want to know what this thing's talking about, it was another interesting kind of language use model that was helpful. All right, I've got another example here. So this is a church near us that we partner with for food pantry. And I just saw this post the other day and I thought, this is just an example of it being more corporate speak. And so here's their post. Hello, everyone. We welcome you to church name. We are excited to connect with you and assist you in discovering opportunities for personal growth and service within our church community. As a gesture of hospitality, we would be delighted to treat you to coffee. We extend a warm invitation to everyone, regardless of background or beliefs. Come join us and let's build meaningful connections together. There's nothing wrong with this at all. Like, they've said what they wanted to say. It's just kind of cold. And so this was just ChatGPT's version of, hey, make this for a young adult to be inviting to. So, hey there, fabulous folks. Welcome to Emmanuel Lutheran Church, the place to be in Jackson, Michigan. We're stoked to connect with you, connect with all of you amazing individuals and help you uncover awesome opportunities for personal growth and service within our vibrant church community. Oh, and did we mention we're treating you to a well-deserved coffee break? So no matter where you are in your journey, spiritual explorer or seasoned believer, we invite each and every one of you to join us together and let's forge meaningful connections together. You can see that just the flavor of this was very different. And all I did was I copied the text of that original post into it and said, please make this engaging and welcoming to a 30-something-year-old. And that was what it spit out. You could then ask it, give me 5 other variations, and then pull stuff as you want. I heard an interesting comment. I think it was actually Neil deGrasse Tyson, of all people, randomly, but someone said their idea was, how could we use ChatGPT for writings on things that we've never wanted to put our name to? Like, there's travel brochures, there's just writing that that isn't incredibly important and doesn't always need to be perfect, but you just got to do a lot of it. And like, where are some times where you can get some benefits from getting some tips and some tools around this kind of writing prompts. All right, I want to jump into Midjourney real quick, which is a photo creation thing, and then we will stop for any other remaining questions. There's a lot of AI art creators out there right now, but Midjourney is, I think, by far the best of them. You get some free usages up front, and then I don't know if it's like $8 a month or $10 a month. They have a subscription model to get regular use out of it. It is very, very powerful. It still has some limitations that they keep improving on. One of which is like human hands are confusing to computers for some reason. And so you have to sometimes watch what it's looking like with hands in the frame. All of the AI art creators struggle so far with text. If there's billboards or signs, text is interesting fonts, but it's like gibberish. And so it'll be updates in the future that makes those texts actually usable. But what I find is that you can get personalized stock photography through this that will be better tailored to you. And unlike the royalty-free sites like Pexels or Unsplash or those kinds of sites, everybody uses those kinds of sites and gets the same photos. And so now you can actually have something differentiating you than what other people are using for free. So like ChatGPT, you type into it, and then it'll give you 4 versions of what you ask for. And then you can either upscale one of those photos, or you can ask for it to redo it, or you can redo a specific one of the photos. Say, give me variations of that particular one. And so I've got some examples of prompts and some images that come from it, but it helps to be specific about what the main thing is that you want, and then start choosing art styles or other parameters that would be helpful to you. And I always add a thing at the end. The --AR is aspect ratio, and then tell it what aspect ratio to make the dimensions of the photo afterwards. So here's some examples. This was someone that put together an example of different art styles that Midjourney can put in. So you put in what you want and then put a comma in and say, make it a sketch drawing, or cartoon or watercolor. And the thing that I put in our ABC Michigan pastors group was pop art Jesus with headphones. And so the more you know about art, the more interesting you can make your Midjourney images. I've got the prompts here for you. Imagine a 20-something-year-old taking a selfie in front of a church stained glass window and an empty church. Aspect ratio for this presentation. And what I realized was I wanted a person holding a phone taking a selfie, but they actually did it how an actual selfie looks, which is their hands out of the frame. And so then I re-asked it, photo of a 20-something-year-old taking a selfie in front of a church. And so that got me the phone, the hand for that. Give me Ryan Reynolds as a preacher, as a fun random one here. I used this I was asking people for real questions for a sermon series, and smiling, happy people always catches people's eye. So a group of 20-something-year-olds sitting at a coffee shop, coffee even misspelled, and it's still understood, guys, talking and smiling, 35mm camera lens, natural lighting, Sony camera, photorealistic. That's that. Group of people worshiping. I thought it was interesting. They think worship, your mouth needs to be up and open. So I guess it's how it interprets people singing. A woman pastor in her 40s wearing clerical collars. You'll notice there is no clerical collar here. So it's interesting which things it has an easier time with or harder time with. We have our cafe with restaurant style dinners. It can also create photos of food, which is interesting. And so this was a crispy cheese beef noodle casserole in a pasta bowl on a farmhouse table. And it just spits it out. And then I did this one here because I feel like we all sometimes feel like this, just surrounded by a whole bunch of technology and wishing we could kind of maybe step away from that a little bit. And so that was that one. But I want to turn it over, trying to respect our hour time, to say I want to open it up for questions that you've got.
Yeah, Dallas, can I ask you just the name of that software again, the program for the making pictures?
Midjourney.
Midjourney. Yeah, I couldn't remember. I remember Mid, and I couldn't remember the rest.
Yeah. ChatGPT has DALL-E 2, which is their free version. I find that Midjourney's always looks a little better.
Okay.
That could change with an update, but.
So just type in Midjourney, Google Midjourney, you'll find it. Right?
Yeah. So Midjourney runs through the Discord app. So Discord's a free app.
Yep. Well,
when
like
you connect with it,
is, right?
do what?
ChatGPT is also through Discord, right?
ChatGPT is just on your web browser. So you can go to,
Oh,
I don't know if it's chat.openai.com, I think is perhaps what it is. But on Discord, if you subscribe, you have a little message bot so that nobody else can see your photos and what you're asking for. Because it can be weird of like, you're working on a project and everybody else is seeing everybody else's projects. So when you subscribe, you can have your own little channel. You ask it for things and
I
they
see.
keep going back and forth.
Okay, thanks.
Have you heard this story out of Germany of a professor there who ran a whole church service from GPT?
I haven't heard it. How did it go?
Jonas Zimmerlein is a philosopher, theologian, assistant professor, and he put together a church service for the Freikirche evangelical church world in Germany, in Fürth, Germany, and they had 300 people show up to watch it. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't actually found the service itself yet to watch. I don't know if it's in German or English, but anyway.
I kind of overshare when I'm using AI stuff because one, then people will ask you about the AI stuff. But I feel like I'm not, being sneaky if I've used something.
Sure.
But and I think it's because when I use photorealistic photos, I like to say, just so you know, these aren't real people. I feel like if you're using digital art, people are just aware it's not real. But I had a sermon that was on like the limits of our brain. And I don't know if it's like Paul talking about seeing things dimly right now and all that kind of stuff. And so I talked about things like with dementia and Alzheimer's and that kind of stuff, and or just how things like ChatGPT and these new softwares can sometimes make us feel small again, of like, how can I compete? I mean, if you're into chess, you know that computers are better than you. It just, they have to be like filtered to be weaker at it to actually beat them at it. But I had ChatGPT write me a poem about a person who's struggling with memory loss, but that God still loves them. And I told people beforehand, this is a poem by ChatGPT, and I read it. And afterwards, everybody only wanted to talk about the poem by ChatGPT. And I actually had a congregant who did some art, and she drew a picture of my wife and I, and she included the poem from ChatGPT. And I'm like, I appreciate that they enjoyed it. But it's interesting that it went over so well. Like, I hope something else in the sermon also went over well.
I found some things that I've had it try to write, which are fantastic, and other things which are like, that's awful.
Yes. Yeah.
We're in between, but.
Well, any other questions?
Just one brief comment. Like a lot of us, when COVID just took off, we just had to just we had never done anything online at all. And so we just had to kind of jump in, do the best that we could at that moment. But I think one of the things I'm hearing from you real clearly is that now that we're past that moment, what are we going to do? And I appreciate what you said. It gives a lot of thought to how do we move beyond the just one camera kind of in the back, and we just hope that we capture something of the flavor of the service to how could we really engage. And I do appreciate that. So thank you.
Thanks. One thing that comforts me is I think sometimes the fear is, computers and AI do make certain jobs have to transform or change, but the skills that you have are still important and necessary. Of when you use the AI art app, when you understand art, like styles and photography, like you have an advantage because you can think about the angles and what you would what you would prompt it for. And so I think if you're using on the generative AI, either ChatGPT or the Midjourney, you can ask it even better questions. You can inform it really well to get better inputs and better outputs. So your skills allow you to use those things even better for what you would use it for. And that's still really useful. But as Danny was saying, I think the social ministry aspect is one of the most important parts of digital technology for today, of how do we engage people throughout the week where they feel more connected and interact and talk and share and feel comfortable to give prayer requests. And because the amount of time people are on site with you is so small in comparison to the rest of the week. And so I think focusing on building that social ministry is one of the most helpful uses of technology right now.